Welcome, everyone, to this is a District of Sechelt Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, September the 11th. I will start with the land acknowledgement. The District of Sechelt is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation. We respect the histories, language, and culture of the people of the Sechelt Nation, whose presence continues to enrich this community. So I'll call this meeting to order. And ask if there's any declarations of conflict. Seeing none, I'll start to ask for a vote on adoption of the agenda. All in favor? Unanimous. And we have no delegations or proclamations. All of council's here except for Councillor Rowe is coming in by Zoom. So I will have to keep watching heavenward for your vote or comment. And we'll go right to business item 5.1, the housing needs report. And I think Matt Thompson from Urban Matters will present the report.
Thank you, Chair and Council. I think we have a presentation PowerPoint that should be loaded up as well. Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate. There we go. I'm here to report on the 2024 housing needs report, the interim housing needs reports as required by the province. In late 2023, at the end of last year, the provincial government updated housing needs report legislation, which had originally been put into place in 2018. And mandated that all municipalities and local governments across BC undertake and complete interim housing needs reports by the end of this year, January 1st of next year. As part of that, they were quite flexible in the requirements that they provided. So there were three primary legislative components that had to be included. One is a new calculation required under the legislation by the province that has to be part of these housing needs reports, which looks at 5 and 20-year assessments of need. This uses a prescribed methodology developed by the province and delivered through an automated calculator that's online. For context, the 5 and 20-year period starts at 2021 due to the census and goes to 2026, and the 20-year outlook is 2021 to 2041. In addition to that, key statements of need were required in previous housing needs reports. The province required one additional statement of need as part of the interim update, which is a statement on the relationship between housing and transit. Finally, the third additional component of the interim housing needs report is a description of municipal actions that have been taken on housing since the previous HNR. The previous HNR was adopted in late 2020, early 2021, depending on which local government was receiving it. But it was undertaken regionally, led by the town of Gibsons as the administrative body, but working closely with District of Sechelt and SCRD staff to deliver that report. Generally speaking, HNRs use a number of data sources. Our report that you've received goes above and beyond the legislative requirements, and instead provides more of a fulsome update to that report released in 2020, which includes a number of data points from the census, the 2021 census. So the previous HNR was relying on 2016 data, but also updated projections, information from BC Assessment, and the limited rental market information that we have available, as well as some information from Cover the Coast and some municipal data as well. So the report itself is again goes above and beyond the municipal requirements in order to provide more information to council about other planning objectives and an evidence base for OCP updates with which the district is undertaking. So the report itself is composed of kind of four major parts. One is current and historical demographics, so a population and demographic profile of the District of Sechelt. Part two is a housing profile, which looks at household income, housing stock, core housing need, and an affordability analysis, and a look at homelessness. The third part is community growth, that is scenarios of population and household growth over the next 20 years. I should note that these projections are again based on the prescribed methodology of the province. So I'll unpack those a little bit more as I get into the presentation. And then finally, some of the key housing needs, which includes the statements of need and the 5 and 20-year housing capacity assessment. So I'm gonna run through some of the key stats and just talk a little bit about what's changed since the previous HNR and the data. So the District of Sechelt grew between 2016 and 2021, grew by 6.2%. So interestingly, this is it was actually outpaced by the SCRD as a whole in terms of growth over that 5-year period. However, I'll note that over the last 15 years, that 2006 to 2021 period, the District of Sechelt's growth definitely outpaced the region as a whole. I think the comparison is about 25% population growth in Sechelt over the 15 years compared to about 15 or 16% in the region as a whole. So a little bit of an anomaly this last 5 years. One of the things that we're also seeing coastwide as well as in Sechelt is an increase in the seniors demographic, which we see here in Sechelt, we see it in Gibsons, and we see it in the electoral areas all around the Sunshine Coast. And really, we see it in many parts of southern BC as well. This is a demographic trend that we're seeing right across BC and many parts of Canada as well. This slide shows household growth and tenure mix. So we can see that there's, in line with population growth, we're also seeing household growth. A total of about 275 new households were added between 2016 and 2021. However, what's interesting about this is that while ownership growth actually increased or was quite a big part of that growth, there was a decrease in the number of renter households between 2016 and 2021. We see this decrease in Gibsons as well, which we're doing the housing needs report for. And as I get into a little bit later in the presentation, one of the factors that may be underlying this or driving this decrease in the number and the proportion of renters is the cost of housing and the scarce availability of new rental that we have on the Sunshine Coast. So you can see that the number has dropped by about 150 households from 2016 to 2021. And I forget exactly what the figure is, but we saw a comparable decline in Gibsons as well. And again, it may be tied to some of these affordability indicators. I'm sure no surprise, most of the housing stock in the District of Sechelt as of 2021 were single detached homes with missing middle. That is everything from a home with a secondary suite all the way up to small apartment buildings, accounting for about 16% of the housing stock. And then a very small proportion, according to the census, in larger apartment buildings and movable dwellings as well. So those are typically modular or mobile homes. This slide speaks to some affordability considerations. What the slide is showing is owner and renter and total household income over the last 4 census periods in the District of Sechelt. And what you can see, is that the brown bar in the middle is median renter income, and the dark blue bar on the left is median owner income. So both of them have kind of progressively increased, although you see a kind of increase in 2011 and then a decline in 2016. The 2011 income data is not as reliable because it was a national household survey year, so it was a voluntary survey instead of the census long form. So we take those income figures with a little bit of a grain of salt, but overall we can see kind of an increase in incomes across both owners and renters and all households, with renters closing the gap a little bit in 2021. But that has to come with a little bit of context or a bit of a caveat, which is one of the things that's impacting the 2021 census data is the impact of COVID, and in particular, the CERB benefit, the emergency relief benefit that was provided by the federal government. Academic studies have showed that benefit disproportionately benefited very low and low income households, which is more likely to be renter households in most communities as well. And so that actually pulled up renter incomes for that year alone. So what we may be seeing here, it looks like a big increase in renter household income between 2016 and 2021. That may actually be overinflated because of the impact of that temporary income intervention. And we see that this has impacts on core housing need as well. However, I will note that this may also be impacted, and it's hard with the census information that we get, and we're not able to cross-tabulate it all. But one of the things that may also be driving this is that we saw the decline in the number of renters between 2016 and 2021. If it is in fact true that the lowest income renters are leaving the coast because of scarcity of housing and housing affordability, that would also be a driving factor in bringing up the renter incomes, because you'd be losing kind of the lowest cohort amongst your renters. So we worked and used data which was local wherever possible. So this figure looks at rent. The rental information available through CMHC is very limited for Sechelt, because there's a relatively low number of purpose-built rental units in comparison to those in the secondary market. That is, things like secondary suites or private homes being rented, or condos, or auxiliary dwelling units. And so Cover the Coast actually did a survey in 2023 and 2024, which was quite comprehensive, looking at rentals across the whole rental market. And they found that these were the costs associated with renting different sized units. So everything from around $1,450 for a studio, all the way up to nearly $4,000 as an average for renting a 4 or more bedroom unit. So quite a high cost, and we've seen those costs over the last 10 or 15 years really increased dramatically, not just on the Sunshine Coast and in Sechelt, but all over metropolitan and even rural regions in BC. Unfortunately for us, our rental market is being driven and pressured by pressure from the Lower Mainland and Metro Vancouver. So we're, smaller communities with sort of bigger city housing pressures because of our proximity to that large metro center, and because of the lack of purpose-built and dedicated rental in many of our communities. So the result of this is we looked at median household income by household type, and what it would cost to rent a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom unit in Sechelt at these different sort of median incomes that are calculated for each of these household types. And what we're seeing here is that the gray indicates it's affordable. There's no affordability concern. The orange blocks mean that a household has to pay 30% or more of its income in order to be able to afford that type of unit. And the red blocks mean that a household has to pay 50% or more of that of their income towards that type of unit. So we can see that the greatest pressures are on lone parent families, which are single income families, and non-census families. So non-census families indicate anybody who's living alone or with an unrelated roommate, but most of those, that group of households are individuals living alone, anywhere from 80 to 90%, depending on the community. And so what this is telling us is that renter incomes for these groups, in particular, lone parent families and individuals living alone, are not sufficient to be able to afford rental in the current housing market. It's a little bit easier if you are, a couple with children, probably at a higher earning capacity, or even a couple without children, which are often sort of older couples whose children have left home. But even then, if you're entering the rental market now on a median income, it's insufficient to be able to affordably get in and pay for your rental and utilities. So big housing pressures in the rental market. And reflected again, we're not doing the work for the SCRD. That's taking place with another consultant, but in Gibsons, we're seeing very similar pressures, so comparable across the region and in the 2 municipalities. The District of Sechelt has, we've looked at purpose-built rental stock and the age of that rental stock. And although there's not a lot of units that are captured by CMHC, we can look at what is captured. And one of the things that we typically flag is the age of purpose-built rental, because older purpose-built rental tends to be the most affordable. By nature of it being an older unit, it doesn't necessarily command the same rent that a brand new build would, which may have more amenities or nicer appointments. But older stock is also more susceptible to redevelopment. And not to say that redevelopment is bad. It can be a boon to a community to add more stock. Maybe the older building is not highest and best use, and so it makes sense to build a new rental, but it does drive prices up. And so we're in this sort of bit of a paradox where we need new rental stock in order to plan for the future, and in order for that new rental stock to be the affordable stock of tomorrow. But by replacing older stock, we are losing some of the affordable stock in our communities. In the District of Sechelt, a little over a third of rental units were built prior to 1981. This is lower than we would see in large metropolitan communities like Vancouver or Burnaby, which have high proportions of renters, but is pretty typical of a smaller community. We saw a lot of Canadian rental stock kind of come online between the 60s and the 80s. That's when there was the sort of the biggest boom and senior government interventions that supported the development of that stock. In recent years, thanks to CMHC financing and a few other government tools, we've seen an increase in the number of new purpose-built rental starts kind of across BC and in communities across BC. This slide shows the cost of home ownership over the last about 17 years, so from 2006 to 2023. And generally what we can see is that roughly between 2006 and about 2014-15 is, depending on the type of unit that you're looking at, you may see peaks and valleys, ups and downs, or a bit more of a plateau. But starting around 2014, 2015, 2016, we start to see sharp increases in the cost of owning here on the coast, regardless of what unit type you're looking at, whether it's a single family dwelling or a dwelling with a suite or row housing or an apartment. All of them start to really increase right around that time period. That's a pattern that we see in communities across BC and Canada, is that big inflection point right around 2015, 2016. It also corresponds to an inflection point in a lot of purpose-built rental, where we see a decline in vacancy rates right around the same time. So as home prices go up, the availability of rental goes down because it's harder to get into the ownership market. So more people are looking for rental, so there's less availability and less stock in the rental market. We see a little bit of a dip in 2019, 2020. There were some provincial interventions, particularly kind of speculation tax and foreign purchasing interventions that weren't all specific to the coast. A lot of them impacted Metro Vancouver, but they did soften or quiet the market for a little while. And then right around 2020 with COVID, we see big increases again. And again, this is not unique to Sechelt or the Sunshine Coast. This is happening in metropolitan regions and smaller communities across BC. COVID really did a number on housing prices in BC and has really radically affected affordability. I think there's a whole number of factors that have impacted it, but including, BC being seen as a safe space for investment and real estate investment, both nationally and internationally. So this slide, much like our rental one earlier, looks at owner affordability. I do want to sort of provide the context that this assumes that you don't own an asset. This is not about a family that is selling a unit and then buying another unit. This is really asking the question, if you are a median earning family or household of any of these types, and if you're entering the market for the first time, can you afford to purchase or not under current housing prices? And so what we're seeing is that most household types all household types cannot afford at current median income, to purchase a single detached dwelling. Once you start looking at more multifamily forms of housing, townhouses, apartments, or multiplexes, it gets more affordable, but really only for couples without children and couples with children, who tend to be, again, dual earning families or households, and therefore have a higher median income. They're more likely to be able to get into the market, but they may still be paying 30% or more of their income, in that 30 to 50% range, if they're only earning the median income. So again, really high affordability pressures. And what this means functionally is that for first-time buyers in Sechelt, there are two options. One is over-leverage yourself potentially, which then can really impact you when interest rates change, as we've seen over the last number of years, or wait until you purchase. And we all know that that's a bit of a gamble, because even if you can increase your down payment and increase your income in a 5-year period, the cost of housing, given the direction that we've seen it go over the last few years, may outpace that growth in your income that you're seeing. So it's a sticky point. And of course, we know that you have more housing security if you have ownership, generally speaking. But if you're kind of leveraged quite high and subject to changing interest rates, then that can be a big risk for families or households who are buying. So this slide here is the key indicator that's called core housing need. So core housing need is an indicator that's used widely in Canada by Statistics Canada and CMHC to measure housing vulnerability. And it's effectively a two-part indicator. And the first part is Statistics Canada asks the question, are you having affordability issues? That is, are you paying 30% or more of your income towards housing? Are you having, is your household adequate? That is it in good repair? Are you having maintenance issues, black mold issues? Do you need major repairs done? And is your housing suitable? That is, do you have enough bedrooms for the people that are living in it, or are you experiencing overcrowding issues? So affordability, adequacy, and suitability are often referred to as housing indicators in the context of the census. And the way that core housing need is calculated is StatsCan looks at a household and says, are you experiencing any one of these things? Are you experiencing an affordability issue, an adequacy issue, or a suitability issue? And if you are, is your income sufficient that you could afford a reasonable alternative in the market? And I should note that their definition is not necessarily based on those rental figures which were collected locally. They may be based more on census figures, which tend to have lower rents. So they're asking, can you afford a reasonable alternative in the market? And if you can, then you're not in core housing need, even if you're having a housing issue. But if you can't afford an alternative, if you're overpaying or you're overcrowded or you're in a poorly maintained unit and your income is such that you can't afford an alternative, then you're deemed to be in core housing need. And so what this is showing us is that in 2016, well, generally speaking, renter core housing need is higher than owner core housing need. This is directly correlated to incomes. As income is lower, you have less housing choice, and you're more likely to experience one of these issues and not have a way out of it. But what's really interesting about this graph is that we see a decline in a pretty dramatic decline in renter core housing need between 2016 and 2021. And again, this is a trend that we've seen all over the country in the midst of a housing crisis. As housing costs are going up and rental vacancy rates are going down, why are we seeing a decline in renter core housing need? And part of the answer is the CERB benefit again, which offered a significant amount of income security over a short period of time to very low income and low income renters. And the other part of the equation, because this is what we're seeing here in the Sechelt figures is more of a dramatic decline than we've seen in other communities, but I think that it's probably correlated to the decline that we see in renters overall. Again, the data don't fully support this because we can't do the cross tabulations, but my concern in seeing this and the decline in renters is that we're losing our very low and low income renters here on the Sunshine Coast, not just in Sechelt, but it's happening in Gibsons too. And that may be part of why instead of seeing a slight decline in core housing need amongst renters, we're seeing a pretty dramatic one. It's driven by these two factors of the CERB benefit having a big impact, and potentially the decline in renters overall, and some of those being lower income renters who don't have housing choice. Homelessness on the coast, as we know, has become more of a prevalent issue. In 2021, there was a provincial study done looking at individuals with no fixed address who are either in the shelter system or on some form of income assistance provincially, and it identified 146 individuals across the region who were experiencing either hidden or visible homelessness. This is higher than the number from the 2023 point-in-time count, which was 97 individuals, but we know that point-in-time counts are generally very good at catching folks in urban centers who are visibly homelessness or in the shelter system, and not so good at catching the couch surfers or the folks in the backwoods or who are living in really, really substandard housing that's probably unsafe. That's not what a point-in-time count is good at. So the reason that these 2 points in time these two sort of data points are up there is that the top one is going to influence that OCP capacity calculation, and it does differ from the point-in-time count. So I wanted to kind of flag both of those. So the point-in-time count identified 97 individuals experiencing homelessness, and the provincial, what they call the Integrated Data Project data, counted 146 individuals across the region. So moving into projected household growth, effectively what we're seeing here. So just a note on household projections as required by the province. The HNR sort of capacity calculation requires two growth scenarios to be developed as part of the overall calculation of housing need. The first is based on historical growth in the community. That is, you look at long-term trend lines of population growth and how that translates into households. So births in the community, deaths in the community, in-migration, out-migration, pretty standard population kind of statistics fare. That's based on the BC Stats population projections. The other scenario is based on a regional growth scenario. And so that is, what essentially asking the question, what would growth look like in your community if you were to grow at the pace of your region? So for some communities that are not growing very quickly, that forces a big jump up where the local growth scenario might sort of be a flat line if you haven't been growing much in the last few years. The province is kind of pulling those communities up by adding the regional growth scenario. Whereas in Sechelt, where for most of the last 20 years, you've outpaced the region, it's not that much of a difference. And although the last 5 years, Sechelt's growth has slowed a little bit in comparison to the region, it's really not that much. So the scenarios themselves are quite close, but in the methodology, the province asks that you take an average of the two. But what this shows us is that, over the long term, over the next sort of 10 to 15 years, we do see an increase in renter households. Again, that's based on long-term growth, not necessarily the recent trend in declining renters, but also a growth in owners. So between 2021 and 2034, about 1,300 additional owner households and about 320 additional renter households. So finally, I'm not going to dwell on this point too long because the previous housing needs report from 2021 had key statements of need that we've really only adjusted slightly based on the new stats. Most of the framing remains the same. We know that the same pressures are in place, the same issues for seniors, for families, for rental housing. There is one new statement about housing near transit, but we know that that's also a bit more of a challenge in small communities where we don't have robust transit systems or they're kind of based along our ribbon community from Gibsons to Sechelt. So. But just wanting to note that housing near transit statement is a new addition. The others are sort of reflecting many of the same concerns that we saw in the previous housing needs report. So last couple of slides here, and this is probably the biggest change that we've seen in the housing needs reports through this latest round of legislation is the addition of this 5 and 20-year calculation. And so effectively what this calculation does is it looks at a number of different components of need across communities. So how much supply, it asks the question, how much supply would we need to reduce our extreme core housing need or households that are paying 50% or more of their income towards housing? Like how many affordable units would we need to bring online to address that? How many affordable units would we need to bring online to address or reduce homelessness? How many units would we need to address suppressed household formation? That is the young folks that can't move out and get a rental because there's no availability or it's not affordable. The young renters that may want to purchase but can't do so. These households are sort of sometimes referred to as suppressed formation, or suppressed household formation, because they can't form into the types of households or the tenures of households that they might have done 20 years ago. So that's a component of the calculation. The biggest component of the calculation is component D, that is household growth over the next 5 and 20 years. So, meeting the growth of our communities based on these projections is, the large part of the work that the local governments have to do is accommodating that, but these other components are a component as well. Finally, the last two components are a rental vacancy rate adjustment. So this is asking essentially, if we assume that appropriate levels of rental housing are built at an affordable level and appropriate levels of rental are built to address household growth, how many more rental units will we need to achieve a healthy vacancy rate of 3%? And then finally, the demand buffer, this is sort of an economic demand side component that is intended to account for speculation and investment and choice in the market. So we need to build extra units to allow for folks that are buying into the market, not just based on need or what they have to have, but also based on choice. Or, for example, investing in holiday homes in the community. So this is what these figures look like. over the 5 and 20-year period. Again, the province is defining this first 5-year period as 2021 to 2026 because they're using that last census starting point 2021 or the last census date as the starting point, and then going out 5 and then 20 years from there. And so the key sort of legislative requirement here and the link to the OCP that's occurring is that your OCP, when you update it, it has to allow for at least 2,890 new units through zoning. Often what we see, we've done some OCP capacity calculation in other communities. What we often see is that OCPs generally allow for a lot more than that 5 to 20-year requirement, except there are some cases where that's not the case. But generally speaking, the OCP does accommodate that, and it becomes a question of directing growth and where is that growth going to go and what are the policies that are going to support growth in the right areas. And what are the roles of local government in bringing online some of the affordable components of this calculation? So we know that the local governments shouldn't be responsible for building and developing your own affordable housing. That is a senior government responsibility. But what is the ask then become of the province or the federal government in supporting, for example, 200 new units of affordable housing over the next 20 years to address extreme core housing need, or 50 more units over the next 20 years to address homelessness. And so that becomes kind of a question of advocacy and partnership, I think, at the local government level. So that is the end of the presentation. I know that's a lot of information to sort of present, and so I apologize for a bit of the for the information dump, but I would welcome any questions that council has.
Thanks very much, Mr. Thompson. No, don't apologize at all. It's a fantastic report to have. We really need this kind of information to help drive policy. So it's terrific information. So I'll turn it over to council. Any comments? Councillor Bell.
Through the chair. Yes, excellent report. This kind of data is invaluable, as you note, for funding and, as you say, policy and regulation. The one thing that I'm always, when I see the demographic around our seniors population, that's the one that just sort of, stands out for me in terms of, we don't have the stock. People are in these large houses, and where do they move to? Then we've got that other segment that are needing perhaps more care, that type of thing. When we're talking about rental, how does that factor in terms of, I know you maybe don't carve out different populations, but I'm wondering how that fits in terms of our demographic.
So I think that that's a great question. There are rental pressures in pretty much every community that we work in across BC and even parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. I think that there's a couple of questions in terms of the demographics that we've seen, and certainly Cover the Coast is well on top of a lot of these issues. But there are a few key housing issues. Seniors housing is one of them, and support for aging in place. Workforce housing, as I think I noted, the pressure around lower income renters. We need to support those folks in order to allow them to stay on the coast and give them the housing options to stay on the coast. And we need to support seniors with, I think purpose-built rental allows seniors to remain in the region or, to downsize if they want to, if they're no longer able to take care of their home and move into a lower maintenance form. If they're not, if folks are still independent, but unable to maintain a large property, for example, then a rental home, either as a transition to a smaller purchase unit or just as a longer term option if you've sold off your owned home is a great option. That being said, there's a component of this report there's a lot that this report doesn't touch on in terms of wraparound services as well. And of course, we need that in order to support aging in place in our communities for the seniors population. I will note that I think one of the intentions behind recent government legislation on density on single family lots in larger metro centers is to allow families to redevelop their own homes to provide homes for their children that those children can own and that can allow the older parent to stay in place as well and age in place. We know One of the barriers to that, of course, is the cost of construction, and the cost of building right now can make that somewhat prohibitive, and particularly with high interest rates, although those are starting to come down right now. But over the long term, we've seen a few examples. There's an example in Delta, the city of Delta, for a woman named, I think her name is Barb Higgins, but they call it the Higgins model, where they densified a single family lot in Delta, and they subdivided it in 2 lots, and then each of those had 2 units on it, and her 3 children were able to live on that. So that is a viable option if if there's financial support and stability within the family and a desire to do that. So that is an option. In the district of Sechelt, where it's appropriate and where that density is taking place. But I do think that the report also speaks to the need for a lot more investment in rental housing. We see that there's a deficit of that on the coast, generally speaking, and certainly purpose-built rental is much more secure than secondary rental, because you tend to be less susceptible to immediate changes the landlord wants to make, or potentially being rent-evicted or evicted because they want to put a family member in, or any of those things that are allowable under the RTA. So that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, but I'll start with what I hope is an easy one first. Do you look, when you're doing this work, do you look at the interest rates? It mentions in here that you've used a particular rate and term as part of your assumptions, but how much do these numbers change if you look at different rates? If the rates go up, how much do these numbers worsen? If the rates come down, how much better do they get? I'll start there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question. So I mean, the affordability analysis for the ownership is a point in time. So we did it earlier this summer with where rates were then. So they've come down a little bit. So we would anticipate that would lower monthly mortgage costs. I will say that we've done a few analyses like this in the same community over the last couple of years. And as interest rates have gone up dramatically, that has dramatically impacted it. But it's hard to untie it also from the fact that housing has increased considerably. So yes, absolutely, the drop in interest rates that we're seeing right now will ease pressure and make it easier for those folks that are right on the margin or almost able to get into the market. But it's not going to reduce the cost of housing so much because it's so high and it remains so high.
Anyone else? Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. I was just wanting to get a little more information on your demographic projections. You said you used an online tool from the government, and I was just wondering what variables you put into that tool to generate that number, because of course that is really what's driving a lot of our needs assessment, is that long-term projection, which the further you go out, the less reliable really the data is. But I'd like to hear about what went into that. And also, I'm just noting in the tables, like 2021 is the start date of all these studies. So are they still going by that as the base year for us to consider everything going forward? Because we have done a lot of development approvals in the last year or 2. So that, will affect the supply or whatever, supposed supply. So just trying to get a handle on what it means for us here.
Yeah. So yeah, starting with your projections question, the projections are, as I'd mentioned, there's 2 scenarios. The primary scenario is a local growth scenario. That's based on the BC Stats population projections for Sechelt. And then layered onto that is our own, well, actually, it is the household count done by the province. So the BC Stats takes their population projections, and then they look at average household size, and they apply that to calculate the number of households. So if you have an average household size of 2, for example, and a population of 10,000, then you'd have 5,000 households. And I think they do have a little bit of a shift, like they look at shift in average household size over time as they project out into the future. So that's how they do that. With our work, we try to add a little bit more nuance to that using some census figures. I'm not the projections person on our team, but we do have one. But effectively, we add in a few layers, including tenure, age of primary household maintainer. So we look at different age cohorts across that, and then also household type. So single parent household. So we layer that on to get a little bit more nuance. But functionally, the total number is driven by the provincial methodology, which is a calculation in that local growth scenario. It's the local population growth, then converted into total households projected out over time. And in the regional scenario, it's effectively saying, if we apply the regional growth rate to your local population or your local households, here's what it would look like as it grows over time.
I've worked with BC demographics before, and what they do is they tally it all up to come up with a provincial overall. So they kind of, do a top-down approach as well. So it's kind of general. If anything, it's optimistic, because of course the province wants to be optimistic about growth, but my findings sometimes were that they were not achieved. So the tenure type is something you came up with in terms of those projections, given
Yep.
your knowledge. It's not.
And based on long-term historical trends in Sechelt. So again, I was saying this to one of the planners in a community that we're working with. We're in a housing market right now where essentially what you build can determine your future demographics. So if you build a lot of family housing, you're going to see more families. If you build a lot of one-bedroom type units, you're going to see a lot more small households, because wherever housing is available is where people are going right now, because there's just such a scarcity across especially southwestern BC. So I would caution that the projections are not intended to be prescriptive or predictive. They're based on historical trends. And so again, land use planning has a pretty significant role in this day and age and in this part of the world in determining how populations grow and change, both in urban centers and smaller municipal centers.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of tag on to Councillor McLaughlin's comment about the approvals that we've seen over the last couple of years, do the numbers in here consider, or has other work that you've done considered how many units actually need to be approved in order to get that many units built? We seem to be coming up against an issue here where we're approving things all over the place. But developers are getting their approvals, but then they're running into, construction costs, interest rates, labor shortages, et cetera. And so we're not getting as much built as I think we're being suggested we need to meet the demand. So I'm just wondering if any of your other work has touched on that.
That's a great question. It touched on, not in detail. I think that is, that's a tough land economics exercise to kind of go through, because there are so many stages in the development approvals process that kind of filter down to what actually gets built. One of the numbers that one of my colleagues who's a land economist sort of has used in general analysis is that like what you see in an OCP's capacity, about 25% of that will get built out over the next 10 years, sorry. And so you can add a whole bunch of capacity, but then only a fraction of it will get built out. What the relationship is between approvals to then build permits to then occupancy, I don't know, but yeah, I think that is a challenge that right now Andy Yan from SFU called it, we're facing pretty significant economic headwinds. We've got the cost of labor, we've got scarcity of labor, we've got the cost of construction, we've got high interest rates, and although those are coming down right now, and high cost of land, makes it quite a challenging development environment. And that's part of why you see both provincial and federal interventions really focusing in on incentives and expediting the development approvals process. I don't think that's a panacea for the housing crisis, but it's what local governments have within their sort of zone of control in order to manage.
Sorry, following question, or Mayor Henderson? Thank you, Chair. So this projects, and it kind of ties into the other questions. Over the next 5 years, in this study is based from 2021.
Yeah.
So the obvious question, perhaps to many of us, is how many housing starts, how many housings do we have to build between now and 5 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite it's not quite broken up to be 1 quarter each 5 years, but more or less it is that way in a lot of the methodology. So you could say for every 5 year, you take that 20-year total and say that roughly for every 5 years within that 20-year period, we need 1/4 of that growth.
Or then 1/20th each year is.
Or 1/20th
Yeah.
each year. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, give or take, whether these are, development is not a highly predictable industry. And so things like, the cost of construction and interest rates can change the market radically. We've seen, for example, that in the city of Kelowna right now, where we're working, things favor rental housing significantly because of the CMHC financing and because of the incentives that the city has in place. So that's the product that they're getting online right now. Condos are kind of waiting until the market improves and we see a better interest rate environment, and maybe more access to labor or cheaper materials.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Councillor Inkster.
A few things here, just in reference to some of the comments previously. I think I'm thinking that Councillor Toth meant when he said we're building everywhere, that we're actually building within the sewer catchment area everywhere. Because other than the Havies development, which I'll call the Havies not go forward, the rest of the community seems to be, the rest of the huge build and density seems to be in our sewer catchment area. So it seems to be all about sewer hookups. The other question was in reference to the mayor's comment. He asked about housing numbers needed. I would ask you type of housing needed rather than numbers of housing, because we could say and make that rationale for this at this table continuously. We need to keep approving large houses because we need housing. Near me, there's a fair amount of density in West Sechelt happening. In the sense that the houses are being put together and they're 2 to 3 stories in areas that have 1 to 2 story homes. And the yards are smaller because they're sort of like condominiums, but the unfortunate part is it's 1 to 2 people living in them rather than what you would hope to be 3 to 5. So that's sort of the retirement population. So it's not necessarily increasing the availability. The other thing I wanted to ask you though is my main important question is, did you look into incomes at all as part of this? I was going back through your document as I had read it before. I wanted to look at it again before I asked this question. I think that many of us who had parents owning houses in the 70s and 80s know that those parents were dealing with 16 to 22% interest rates, and yet being able to afford that, and 1 to 2 cars and vacations every year, although we didn't fly around the world. We might have camped in Birch Bay, but there was an affordability thing that happened there, and there are graphs that you may have seen out there that show the income, the cost of housing go like this, and the income, it seems to be at its widest gap right now. And in seeing you nod, it makes me ask an economics question. Is there anything we can do to increase the incomes up here, probably as part of an economic development plan, in order to make housing more affordable to the average family? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, all good questions. Yes, we looked at income. Short answer is yes, we looked at income, and definitely we're seeing that the growth in the cost of housing has significantly outpaced the growth in incomes in the region, in Sechelt, frankly, in most of BC and in many parts of Canada. The broader question about interventions is a really good one, because there are a number of interventions that are needed. I would argue many interventions that are needed in order to address the housing crisis. One is a supply side intervention, which puts more supply on the market, and especially of targeted affordable housing for very low and low income renters, but also just more supply and diversity and choice in general. And so to your first question, in where there is a growth catchment area, infill and density is what is needed in the long term. We also saw that on the affordability assessments, that townhomes and condominiums tend to be more affordable in terms of purchasing. So again, it's not to say that all housing should necessarily be one thing, but a diversity of housing is necessary in order to meet all price points. But we also see in addition to supply as an intervention in addressing the housing crisis, so too is income. Yes, bringing incomes up, economic development, high income industries. I'm not an economic development expert, so I won't speak to what local governments should be doing to draw higher incomes into a community, but certainly that is one strategy. Job retraining for industries that are on the decline. But there's also the interventions from senior government. One of the most interesting data points that is in this presentation and others we've done is what we saw in the decline in core housing need between 2016 and 2021. In the midst of a housing crisis, a national income intervention that effectively took the pressure off the lowest income renters in Canada and gave them room to breathe and took them out of core housing need for a discrete period of time, showed the effectiveness of income interventions. Doesn't necessarily, there's discussion of universal basic income, or maybe we need more targeted interventions, but there are what we'd call demand side interventions or supports that can be put in place. But it's not going to be any one of these things that solves the crisis. It's going to be a suite of options all working together over a long period of time, because it's taken us a kind of a generation to get into this point, and it's probably going to take us a generation to get out.
Thanks. I wonder if I could wrap up unless anyone else has, Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Most of this I wrote during the most of these questions have come up during the presentation, so thank you for being here to address a lot of it. Looking at page 51 of our agenda package, the different components that go into this housing need for the next 20 years. I was just wondering if you could reiterate what you had said about the demand buffer component, because we're looking at 30% of the units that we need to build are going to be, for what I heard, as being like vacation homes, secondary homes, things you might construe as luxury goods. I just wanted to clarify if that was indeed the case, and is there mechanisms that local government can look at to try and manipulate that demand buffer, maybe to try and bring it down a bit?
So yeah, good question. I will admit that this is the component that I understand the least, because it's a bit of an economic black box based on some economic indicators that the province put together. The best understanding that I have of it is essentially that it is a composite index, and it varies. What that index is varies across communities, that looks at essentially the relationship between density and the cost of housing. And so the higher the cost of housing and the lower the density, the more likely you are to have a high buffer. Because what you're effectively seeing is that people want to live there and they're willing to pay a lot to do so. So you need to essentially create more housing diversity and choice. Now, I did say that holiday home speculation investment, and that's true, that's a component of it. This essentially, I think, when the province developed this methodology, this was sort of economists, provincial economists saying, you need to build choice and demand into this, because right now, components A, B, C, D, and E are based on need that we're seeing. They're based on population growth or existing underlying need. But there's an element of choice in the housing market, particularly if you are of a higher income or of an income that has a choice, where you can choose what you want, and that's going to influence. So you need to create a buffer that's going to address that. The question as to whether you can manipulate or address that, I won't get into, because I don't understand the index well enough. But again, I do think it's a relationship between affordability and density that's being represented there.
Any other questions? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, well, he's here. Thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering if there are any, if you could put us in context of some other similar type communities that are recreational, former logging towns, like basically towns, right? Because I find a lot of this whole requirement is very much based on the needs of big cities, and it's generalized across so that we all have a deliverable, but it's like assuming all things being kind of equal, and we're not. Like, we do have vacation homes here. We do have large lots of land that can be used, that can be, sold at a very reasonable amount of money, or unfortunately, maybe for speculation on large developments being held over a long period of time. But I'm just wondering, are there other communities that have these issues that you can tell us about? I mean, we also have, being close to Vancouver, that's a special impact, but also just the retirement market. And also, you know, I am concerned that people are leaving here because they can't afford to live here. And that to me is not a great economic indicator. It's a social crisis, really. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I mean, context is very different, but Squamish, I mean, Squamish is another recreational community that was a logging community, resource community. Much closer proximity to Vancouver and no ferry in between, so that's driven demand in Squamish pretty significantly. Vancouver's a number of Vancouver Island communities, you know, from small of Cumberland to Comox, Courtney, Campbell River, are all probably, you know, experiencing the same things. Maybe a few years behind. You know, the further north you get, that you're sort of a couple years behind in terms of the housing market influence, but they're experiencing, I would say, similar issues and addressing them in similar ways or looking at similar solutions. So.
Okay, yeah, I'll pop in one more question just to finish it off. It's actually a question for our staff. I think from the report, you're indicating there's a need for 726 units over a 5-year period. How many, I mean, turning to staff, how many building permits does the town or has the district issued typically per year in the last couple of years? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. In anticipation of that question, I was rapidly trying to find some answers, and it's difficult because some of our data will show TELUS Living as a building permit, right? But that was 60 units. Green Court, I believe, was 91. So there's 150 right there issued in 2023, construction commencing in 2024, occupancy likely in 2025. So which of the 3 years do we count that one for example? So there's 150 right there, which is the 5-year average of 721 would be 145. But otherwise, so we're not looking at 145 new single family dwellings. These are units of all types. They could be basement suites. But I would say historically in the last few years, it would be more in the 80 to 100 range. So this is seeking an increase in what we've been producing thus far.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks very much, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate it. So we'll turn to item 5.2, good segue over to Housing Accelerator Fund. Director Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, great segue. And coincidence would have it, the deadline for the second intake is this week on Friday. A council resolution is not required to make the application. Should we be successful, there will be a resolution to accept the funds granted. So as a brief summary, this is a second intake offered to those municipalities who applied the first time and were not successful. So they won't be accepting new applications from municipalities that did not apply in round one, nor will they be accepting applications from municipalities wishing to top up. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean that we have any further indication on whether or not we will receive these funds. We have had meetings with CMHC advisors who have reached out to us. They did give us feedback on our first application to tell us what scored well and to assist us with our focus. So we're working on an action plan, which is described in the staff report, and there's an attachment as well. And the staff report provides further data, and it does link well with Mr. Thompson's presentation and comments about building the right type of housing, about the generational change is going to take to update our policies and the lag in policy that we've had over a number of years. So there's a lot there to consider. Reflecting on our application roughly a year ago, I think we focused quite heavily on the front end and the number of units per year within 5 years. But I think our application now really talks about two sides of it, number of applications within 5 years, as well as the broader generational shift of the updating of our policies as a whole. So I do believe we have a strong application. Following CMHC's guidelines and numbers, we are eligible to make an application for over $10 million, final number to be confirmed. I'll temper expectations. I think that successful municipalities last time didn't necessarily get what they asked for, but this number is clearly derived from the formulas that CMHC provides us. So we do our best in that regard. And putting our application in. And apologies for the lateness in the terms of the application's due in 2 days. It's just with the timing of meetings, this is how it worked out. So basically what I'm doing with this application, or this, pardon me, this report is just summarizing what we're doing, summarizing the challenges that Sechelt has, where we'd like to go in concert with the housing needs report, in concert with a future OCP review, and the interim measures that we believe are required to both accept the grant and to act on it should we get it. And council has any comments on the action items, that's wonderful. If council would like to say, no, do not apply for this grant, today's the day. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
No pressure.
And just for clarity's sake, are you asking us to pass a resolution now, the recommendations? No, okay.
No, I'm just presenting what we're working on.
Yeah.
But if council has ideas that are different or would like some supplement or additions, subtractions, we can pivot today.
Okay, thanks. Council, anyone? Councillor Bell.
Oh, great work. I can tell how much work went into this. It's incredible. So just on page 54, so though, looking at this, just to clarify, these are the recommendations, the 7 actions that you want to highlight in this funding report. Yes. Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. And then you've got refer this report and the housing needs assessment to Community Associations Advisory Planning Commission and the Housing Action Table. That will come later. Or how does that work in terms of this recommendation?
Well, the recommendation won't be formally endorsed until it goes to council, but that's our course of action. We want to
Okay.
share this. Our housing needs coordinator, Kelly Foley, is watching on YouTube today, unable to attend today, but we're working with her and on a number of initiatives region-wide. We want to share this Advisory Planning Commission, community associations, so that they know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Great. Good to see that in there. Thank you.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you. No questions. I think the report speaks really well. I'm going to move all the recommendations on page 54.
I didn't think we had to move with the recommendations. I thought that's. I think, sorry,
would
go
you-
ahead. No,
Eh.
Director Allen.
Ultimately, these are the recommendations that would be endorsed at council post-application, right? So we're in this funny scenario where ordinarily we'd have this discussion at committee of the whole, we'd go to council, make our application, but the application is due in the meantime. So these recommendations for endorsement will be captured, should council wish to vote for the record, so that we know council endorses this.
Sure, I mean, I'm happy to call the vote. I don't see anyone objecting to any of the recommendations or, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. When this first came to us, I did have some reservations. I didn't feel that we met all of the requirements for an application. Mind you, it had to be, done on very quickly, timeframes, et cetera. But I really don't want to waste staff's time too much because I think we have to have kind of a realistic view of what has happened since we put in our original submission. I mean, we're not a hotspot in the province's view in terms of where they need housing. They need housing in certain areas where there are a lot of workers, where those workers are not getting housing, and that's really costing the province. Like, we need workers too, but I don't see us as being a hotspot for that. And so I don't really think that we're going to be put on a hot list for the province for needing to provide accelerated housing right away as a big priority. Also, Gibson's has got some project funding. And so I don't know if the province would say, well, we already gave some to the Sunshine Coast, like that's where the funding went. We have to be honest. Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the security to put forward accelerated housing when we've already basically approved, in their eyes, in my eyes, many years of potential housing projects? They're approved. So we don't need to go back and say we need help to approve them. Maybe there's 10 or 20 years, according to Angela Letman, of projects approved lately. So that is a lot already. I'm just wondering about the optics of all this. I mean, we can still apply, but, you know, it's exciting to think like you're going to win the lottery. I was hoping to win the P&E home the other night, but I didn't. So, you know, that's fine on a personal level, but this is the municipality. It's really important, I think, that we focus on what we really need to do. And again, my ongoing thing is, and it's become an issue lately with Gibson's, I believe, is the water supply. Do we have the infrastructure? Do we really have the capability to provide our hopes and dreams for all the housing that a housing report might say we should have? And I sense that there is some tension with the water supply issue because of what Gibson's wants to do. And I think that's kind of like a little sign for us that we have to start planning together, coming up with reasonable requests from the government, and also collaborate and have, you know, things that are integrated that support the entire Sunshine Coast community as well. And then we have a stronger case. So, I mean, it's basically, even this housing report we had was basically a bit of an update from 2021, but it is not a rework of that entire report. You know, and 2021 is very unusual data, and a lot has happened to 2024. So I just want us to take a little pause and think about, you know, what is the reality of this, instead of getting all excited about big dollars and potential windfalls, because we have to be very careful, I think, about managing things going forward. We need a sustainability plan. We need to put environmental lens on our OCP. We need to get our OCP done, and the development cost charges. I've been waiting for 2 years. And as projects have been approved, I'm really concerned that we're not getting the development cost charges bylaw done to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I go to Mayor Henderson, just in terms of process, I guess Councillor Toth is able to motion. I'll second it so that we can continue talking about it. Unless anyone has an objection. Mayor Henderson.
Thank you. I think we're only here to give any big roadblocks or possible additions, and so I'd like to offer two. And we've got a general category of parking. I appreciate it's reduced parking standards. I wonder if it would help our application to add low-powered vehicles and micro-mobility to that, because part of the way you reduce parking is encourage other forms of transportation. And the second one is we're talking about referring the report out. I would include groups like the SDBA and the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Association and others. Again, I'm only offering these as a, if that makes our application more appealing, that's what we want today.
No, those are good suggestions, I think. I was going to throw in as an added comment, if there was a weakness in our initial application that the federal government indicated due to our lack of municipal-owned land, maybe we should be suggesting the municipal hall because we're already looking at redevelopment of it. I don't know if that would help the application at all, but is there any other comment before I call the vote? Councillor Bell.
Through the chair. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things is, I just want to make a comment around through to Councillor McLaughlin. I certainly respect your comments. At the same time, over and over again, I hear that the rural communities are always forgotten about. And I guess I look at it as if we don't swing the bat, we're never gonna strike. So, you know, I believe that, and just through the chair, just to Director Allen, what I'm seeing is that you're well prepared in this report. You've got the housing needs assessment and so on. You feel quite confident that you've got all the information you need at this point in time, and you're ready to go. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I say we go for it, and I'm certainly supportive of this as well. But And one other question to Director Allen. You feel that, I think I saw in the notes that CMHC is encouraging us to send our application in, which I believe I saw in the notes.
Yes, that is correct. They've reached out to us, encouraged us to make application, offered us a guidance and advice, feedback on our previous application. So I'm encouraged by that.
Okay, I'm encouraged by that as well. Doesn't make it, is not saying that we'll get it, but I think we really have to get in there and try. And thank you to staff for all the great work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking again before I call the vote. Any other last comments? Then I'll call the vote on Councillor Toss' move or motion. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor McLaughlin opposed. Thank you. So I will move on to item 5.3, the OCP amendment bylaw number 492-35, development density and height policy. Mr. or Dr. Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to be here this afternoon. For the interest of time, I won't get into the staff report too much, but I will go over the presentation, which is in the staff report. Basically, we wanted to bring the latest proposed amendment to the OCP to the Committee of the Whole for similar reasons as the previous item, 5.2 on the agenda, where we are looking for endorsement before coming back to a formal council meeting for another second reading. Based on the input at the last public hearing in July, along with lots of other input prior to that, we have made further changes to the proposed bylaw. And one of the major changes is up on the screen right now. It's actually adding a text section to Part 4, Section 5, Land Use Policies for Residential and Special Infill Areas. And these 3 bullet points are intended to provide clarification on the supremacy or primacy of Figure 17 as being a very important policy reference in the OCP. And that was raised at the public hearing. It's probably the most popular page to look at in our OCP by the development industry and citizens to understand what kind of development, what type of density and typology of housing can occur in their neighborhood. The second bullet statement is intended to actually, in hindsight, this should be redone, and it's probably good that we're bringing it to Committee of the Whole, because we should actually delete Section 5.4, the references to prohibition against lot consolidation and apartment development, because that is completely contrary to the housing needs report, what we need in this area of the village. And it's an old policy that just doesn't make sense anymore. So that whether it remains as is or we delete the text right out of Section 5, we can do either. And the third bullet is to clarify that the granting of density and height increases for developments in exchange for amenities may still be considered through the rezoning process when and where the district deems appropriate and by legislative means guided by the Local Government Act. And the legislative means today are the new amenity cost charge bylaw option that we have. The province wants to get local governments away from community amenity contributions as part of the rezoning process to have a clearer framework for council to consider these exchanges for higher density for amenities for the community. So that's the first part of the policy change. And the second, if I can just advance the screen here. Oh, there. The second is proposed Figure 17, which has been adjusted again. based on feedback from the last public hearing and ongoing concerns at other public input sessions. What we have done here is basically kept the low-density residential designation the same floor area ratio as exists now in Figure 17, specifying a height policy of up to 2 stories. We took the residential land use designation and split that into 2 because the current OCP policies for residential actually speak to single-family dwelling development with an FAR of 0.4 up to 2 stories, but also has policies in there for duplex, triplex, and townhouse development. So that's another addition is we've reintroduced the typology column, typical building forms, which is helpful, and that was a very good suggestion brought up at the last public hearing. Also, a height of up to 3 stories. Again, we are talking about policy, not regulations, and that is the purpose of the 3rd bullet on the previous text proposal on the previous page, where we are confirming that regulations concerning height, density, density bonuses, whether it's units per hectare or floor area ratio, they are in the zoning bylaw. They are not in the OCP. The policies in the OCP are guidelines, and they are for broad neighborhood areas, not site-specific block-by-block policies. We are trying to get away from that. And in order to fulfill our obligations under Bill 44, and in order to meet our goal of accommodating 2,900 new units over 20 years, a 20-year period by 2041, and 720 units by 2026, and in consideration of the 7 applications that have gone to council in the last 5 years, representing 460 units that have had to go through a lengthy OCP process, this table would alleviate a lot of that time delay. So I'm asking for your support today, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Great, thanks very much. Turn it to council. Any comment on this proposed OCP? Councilor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm still concerned about the FAR in the village area. And I'm concerned that there's not like the, I know we took out the units per hectare, but I am wanting this kind of policy to ensure that we provide a lot of housing units. But I'm afraid what could happen is somebody could take a lot, a house that's 50 years old on a lot and demolish it. So a house that probably has 50 more years of utility and use out of it ends up in a landfill. The landfill is currently like 40% construction waste. We don't want that. And also, you know, so what could be built in its place? What, an 8,000 or 10,000 square foot house for 2 people? It's possible. And so I don't want to see that happen, because unfortunately what happens is when you have a height limit, as we have seen on Sunshine Coast Highway, it's possible that people just want to take that whole envelope as living space and develop and maybe just develop it to the maximum amount to flip it for the maximum amount of profit. And so that is basically a form of land speculation, and unnecessary density does open up all of our properties to extreme land speculation. And it's land speculation that drives up the cost of housing, the cost of the land rent. And we're actually lucky here on the coast because we have lots and places that are not that expensive. It has not been totally taken over by land speculators yet, to the point where it becomes so unaffordable to build anything, or for any of us to buy anything, even in our own community, with new redevelopment, which is expensive. So I think this is a premature table. Like you say, I think we have what we need in the zoning bylaw for SMU. And we wouldn't have been able to approve that if the OCP did not allow it. It must have been within the OCP. Otherwise, you would have had to put those 2 things together through at the same time, which you didn't. And I think it should go, if it hasn't gone to APC, they must have comments on this, and I would want to hear them before we even start this at a public hearing. And the comments that, you know, the community's in support of it, most of what I read there, including from the former Director of Planning and Development Planner for the District of Sechelt, did not speak in favor of this. And many community associations did not. So I think it needs to be looked at some more before it's brought forward here. I don't see what the rush is. Even to say that the OCP has had 20 OCP amendments over these years. Well, what is that? One a year? You know, on average, that is not that much. But in the last 2 years, we've had a lot. But that is not necessarily going to help us have the housing built that we need. It will help land speculation, and that's not going to help any of us. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question in reference to the public hearing that we had, because this isn't a discussion as to whether we go back to a public hearing. I'm not reading that in materials. There was a number of critiques that were made, and I thought that they were educated critiques of the document presented to the community. And I'm wondering through you, Chair, to staff, whether the document submitted today and the information submitted today is reflective of the commonalities within those critiques. So specifically, there were 3 planners, I guess, that we got a lot of planners in our community retiring here. And they were on a consistent, specific topic of critique. And I'm sure that that was very evident to our staff, our trained staff on the issue. So I'm asking, is this new document and what we're doing, looking at going forward with, reflective of those critiques? And there's that question, Chair, but I'm saying if we don't reflect some of those critiques, which I thought were well thought out, that I do have some concerns going forward. Thanks.
So over to you, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Worship. In attachment 1 of the report, I tried to summarize the frequently raised concerns over the past number of public input sessions, and I've offered some comments on each of those. So they are there, they're on paper, and staff believe that going forward with what's being proposed is in the best interest of Sechelt for not only now, but for the next OCP.
Mayor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this is before us for whether we want to rescind second and as page 63 to eventually schedule a 3rd public hearing. So, you know, I think I want to just focus on that at this point, I'm certainly in favor of doing that. Thank you.
I'm looking to the rest of council. I mean, for my own part, I do see where the planning department are trying to react to some of the comments that were coming out. So I'm in favor as well of rescinding and moving ahead with an amended schedule.
So I will move recommendation on page 62. Beat Councillor Toth to it.
First of all, is there a seconder to that? Councillor Bell is seconded. Councillor Toth, are you commenting? Please go ahead.
Thank you. So just procedurally, the last report said request for decision right at the top of the page. And this one says for information. So we've got recommendations both in the last one, the ones that I made, but maybe we didn't. And now we've got this one that says for information. So I didn't make the recommendations because we can't action that at this table anyways. I'm just curious from a procedure if we actually need to pass these recommendations. Thank you.
I'm going to turn that over to our corporate officer for comment.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations do not need to be passed at this meeting to move forward. However, if they were passed at this meeting, they would come forward at the next regular meeting for endorsement. At that time, then council could choose to proceed with the formal rescinding of the bylaw and the second reading of the amended version, the amendment.
So, so it has been seconded. Is there any final comments? Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to reflect that the people that spoke at the public hearing were not just being finicky or whatever. They were looking out in their mind, fighting essentially, unfortunately, for what they felt was the well-being of their community and speaking up for residents. And it wasn't just a technical discussion. I mean, so it was very passionate and long. And so I really do believe that we should not do anything with this today. Perhaps we can, on the side, send it through the APC, get some comments from them, because it's a huge thing which will have incredible impacts on this place. And so I don't know what community is driving the planning department to say, this is what we believe, because, you know, we're supposed to be looking after the public interest. That's what we're supposed to believe in. And, you know, I'm passionate about that. And that I've spent my life really training and working and caring about that. And when I live in this community and I see something that's a huge red flag like this, yes, it gets my back up. And Angela Letman was here, and Ray Parfit, not the most liberal planner you'd ever meet, he was here as well. So I would urge us to not support this. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to turn, if you don't mind, over to Director Allen for comment first.
Thank you. I think the previous report as well identified really the need for the policy shift that's gone on. And this is what we're trying to do. We've been working on this for a number of years. I think that would like to reconfirm with Councillor Inkster's comment. A lot of the changes that were made were born out of the comments at the public hearing. But it's also, I would like to say, unfair that some of the stuff said at the public hearing inferred that the height policy no longer applied, that we don't have development permit areas, that we don't do planning. There was a lot of stuff really that was a part of the opposition that was not a part of the bylaw, that does not apply. And all of that good planning continues to happen at the staff level, at the APC level. There's a lot of work that happens. And it was just frustrating for us that night. We took stock. We made a lot of changes. No planner wants to have a third public hearing, I can assure you, and probably council either. But we truly took a lot of stock. And the reason why we came here today is we want to make sure we're still in the program. And this relates to the housing needs assessment. It relates to the Housing Accelerator Fund. We're not tied to a different community, but what we're doing is observing the trends that have been happening for a number of years and saying the OCP is not meant to be amended time after time after time. The report, at my insistence, notes that both Green Court buildings required an OCP amendment. Green Court's been there for decades, long before these policies were created in the OCP. It's in the right location. How can we make that happen without needing to amend the OCP each and every time? That's what we're doing. Units per hectare is based on the policies of the OCP that talk about ongoing growth of single-family residential up the hill through West Sechelt. Mr. Parfit noted that it's a good neighborhood scale measurement. But that's fine, that's accurate. What we're trying to do is say, Telus Living, Green Court, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to amend the OCP to put a mixed multi-use building and in a mixed multi-use designation. It's in the right location. We're not doing this in Tewanek or places where it doesn't belong, but it's time to reconcile and update and modernize the way we measure. And that's where we are. And I thank you.
Thanks, Director Allen. Councillor Inkster.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to, I guess, staff. I'm really appreciative and supportive of the work they've done on this document and their reaction to the information presented by the public. But I'm uneasy. And when I get uneasy and I have pits in my stomach about decisions we're about to make, I can't support it. I think that in this case, we have to measure twice before we cut once. And so I won't be supporting this. I'm very uneasy. Thank you.
I'll ask a question on my own part. If, I think a vote is going to be called. If it's in favor of the recommendation, what's the process that takes place after that? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. This recommendation would give us, staff and Mr. Pearson, the direction to formalize the bylaws, create the next amendment, bring it back to staff. Now that we've, thank you, bring it back to council. Now that we've talked about the public hearing and brought new information, we are basically committed now to a third public hearing or not doing anything. But so we're committed now, we're in. But what we want in the following weeks here, coming up weeks before we come back to council, is some direction of, hey, we've made some amendments based on what we heard. We want to know we're on the right track.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. I just want to make sure that the public was going to be consulted again, and that's what you've confirmed. Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate planning, taking in the feedback from the public hearing and incorporating what they can and what they feel makes sense. I do appreciate seeing typical building forms listed here. I think that makes that table a lot easier to read if you're not a current or retired planner. And I do appreciate that the FAR column and the height in stories says up to 1.5, up to 0.6, up to 3 stories. So I think it's not an automatic, well, if you're in this area, you're guaranteed that you have to build this. I think it speaks a lot to that growth, that pressure that we are seeing in some areas. You know, when I look at low density residential, like the 0.4, you can still build a 10,000 square foot house on a half-acre lot. But yeah, anyways, I am in support of this. I'm in support of us moving forward on this. I do want to see us refer it to the APC for a little more conversation, but we could talk about that when it comes back to council. Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, through the chair. I would like to see projects that this table is applied to be affordable social housing projects. Because if we identify them in the OCP as that, then that will protect them from severe land speculation. To just hope that we can somehow ask a developer as an amenity contribution to provide some affordable housing is very nice, but really, as I think we found out today, not sufficient at all. We need to be much more strategic about where we can develop, why we can develop, and projects need to come forward that are the right type of projects in the right place at the right time, and not have a kind of a blanket FAR application as shown here. And I'm afraid that this will preclude us from doing that. And it's kind of a recent revelation I've had by reading a book that supports this approach by Patrick Condon out of SFU, a well-known planner, housing policy expert. And he's written a book on this because, you know, we do have a housing crisis. But I see opportunities in Sechelt to protect the value of our land here so we can become an affordable place for people to live, even with new construction. Otherwise, everybody's just, you know, ordinary people that can't afford to live here. They have to find somewhere else to live. And you can say that's good for the economy, but it's just not good for society. It's not good. It's not my idea of a nice Canada, a nice BC, or how I plan to spend my retirement planner years. So I really encourage us to not do this right now, to take a broad step back. There's no rush to do it. Think about the OCP a bit more. Think about the things we've learned about housing and the kind of housing we need. We need to have affordable social housing for people to live here, that we can have as service workers, that we can have as young families, have a chance to get a foothold here. Otherwise, we're just going to have a not livable community. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think I've had comments from almost everyone, so I am going to call the vote. All those in favor of the recommendations? All those opposed? Councillor Inkster and McLaughlin opposed. Thank you. Moving along to 5.4, thank you very much, Manager Pearson. Road dedication for affordable housing, community association referral comments. I'm not sure who will be addressing this. I guess it's Olson.
Thank you, Chair. The report does have my name on it, although the intention is simply to communicate what we've heard from the community associations in response to Councillor Toth's notice of motion, where the original request came from this spring.
Councillor Toth, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the community associations that took the time to look, even if they weren't able to identify anything within their areas. You know, when we consider like the Tillicum Bay Community Association, they are a very geographically small area. So certainly I wasn't expecting everybody to come up with a perfect parcel. It was more about engaging with them, getting them involved in some of these conversations when we talk about affordable housing and we talk about trying to come up with land that we own. There are a couple of parcels in here that I may come back with a further, notice of motion or something, but at the moment, I just wanted to say thank you to staff for actioning this and for the community associations that did take part in this. And for the ones that haven't responded yet, it's not too late. Thank you.
Okay, it's, thank you. Yeah, it's a really valuable exercise and to involve the community associations. I think they really appreciate it. So I will move on then. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, I
Almost got there.
Yeah, it's quick. Thanks, Chair. I think there's many more pieces of land that haven't been identified here within the district of Sechelt in road right of ways that could be available to us for some affordable housing opportunities. Thanks.
Oh, all right. Thanks for that comment. Councillor
And
Bell,
as a
did you?
comment as well, through the
Yeah.
chair, I also want to extend my thank you to the community associations. It's great to see the partnership that's growing and getting stronger because we can all help each other and they know their communities better than any of us. So thank you for that. And I know that we are doing a land strategy report at some point. And I mean, these are very small, but let's not lose sight of that and maybe just add that to the land strategy report at some point. So we have it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Then I'll move along to our final item, 5.5, community safety update. And Councillor Rowe.
Hi, thank you. So this is to formally put before council our second meeting, which we have booked for October 3rd. So I'm looking for support to involve staff and budget in supporting that event. I did send out the what we heard report quite late last night, sorry, but that's just how the cookie crumbles. And it is on the with our agenda on the website. So I'm looking if there's it's a big document, so I don't necessarily want to get into any questions about it, but if there are any concerns or please feel free to ask. So what I'm looking for is to support through staff and budget for October 3rd, meeting number 2 at the Senior Center. And I'm also looking to send the What We Heard report out to the community associations, the SDBA, the chamber, our social media, and I can send it to the ladies to post on the Crime Watch website. That's sorry, I'm sick, you guys. But that's basically it in a nutshell.
Oh, okay, Councillor Toth. No, I don't think there is a motion. I don't think there is a motion here. I don't see one being asked for. Councillor Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I'll seek some clarity from Councillor Rowe because there was conversation or some comment there about budget and staff support,
Yeah.
but this is just a committee of the whole meeting. So whatever we're gonna do,
Oh.
we need to reaffirm it at a council meeting anyways. One question I did have in talking to a couple of the people at the event, and given that we did have to turn away 40 people or more due to the venue capacity, I'm wondering if the venue, either the venue should be different to accommodate more people, or is it something that maybe we should try and schedule 2 sessions back to back so that we can try and accommodate a few more people coming into this process? Maybe the next round of engagement's not gonna have as many people show up, but you know, we had at least 40 people turned away from the first one, so.
Well, we could certainly look at a bigger site like, you know, the Catholic Church in West Seychelles or the Chat Gym. But you also have to remember, the ability to control that crowd, right? As somebody who's had to try and control a crowd in the Chat Gym, it's not always, an easy thing to do. But certainly we could look at doing more than one. I sort of see this as a series of meetings, maybe 2 to 3 months apart over the next little while, but they would be different, right? So what you'd cover, the areas that you'd cover at one wouldn't be repeated in 2 months. There would be something else. But we can talk about that as a planning committee. I guess what I was looking for today was just council support to have a next meeting because we've already basically put it out there. And you know, I'm just trying to follow process on very short timelines on this subject. So whatever that needs to look like process wise.
Yeah, I wonder if you could make a motion or take a stab at one that you could vote on.
The council approve a second public safety meeting on October 3rd. And yeah, do I need to say more than that?
No, we'll relieve you of that burden. So I've got Councillor Bell as a seconder. Any further comment on, has everyone read the document that, yeah, I'm seeing people nodding and saying no.
My plan is to set up a couple Zoom meetings while I'm still here in Victoria. So whoever is able to join on, because as much planning as that meeting took, this one actually will take a bit more. So I can't wait. We can't wait till after UBCM. So that's why I'm here today, bringing this to you.
All right, I'll call a vote on Councillor Rowe's motion. Everyone in favor? Anyone opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Great, and I'll call this meeting to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Everyone in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried. Questions from the gallery?